Our final presentation is Mark Hitchcock, who has been to almost all of our Pre-Trib study groups over the years. We were just discussing that, and Mark has authored over 30 books related to Bible prophecy, and he's one of the top-selling Christian authors. He has a Bachelor of Science from Oklahoma State University, a law degree. What?
Go Pokes.
Okay. A law degree from law in Oklahoma City University, School of Law, and has earned a THM, that's the 4-year Master of Theology, and from Dallas, and a PhD from Dallas Seminary, and is an associate professor at Dallas. He lives in Edmond, Oklahoma, and his wife Cheryl and him he serves as senior pastor of Faith Bible Church. He and his wife have been married, have married 2 sons, and this is wrong.
We have 2 married sons.
They have 2 married sons. That's what it is.
That's what it means,
It's written wrong here. He serves as, and I write these, well, so that explains it. He serves on the board of the Pre-Trib Research Center, and he'll be speaking on the Gog-Magog war current stage setting. So, wow. I got to say, let her rip, Tater Chip.
Thank you, brother. All right. God bless you, man. Thank you. Well, in my bio there, but the thing I'm most thankful for and grateful for to God is I've got 7 grandchildren. My wife's not here with me this year because our youngest son, they had their first child. Our older son has 4 children, and our younger son, they just had their first child, but they have 2 children that they're fostering, that they're trying to adopt. So I was there helping hold down the fort with all that, and I left her by herself to do all that. So anyway, Cheryl's doing that. But that's the greatest blessing in my life at this point, having the wonderful grandchildren that God's given to me. Batting cleanup here at the conference. Jeff Kinley kicked us off, batting cleanup. And I always wonder, I asked Tommy, I said, okay, I'm last. And either I'm last because you think that that'll help more people to stay, or people will go ahead and feel free to leave. So either way, it works out. This is around Christmas time, so I got a story for you. There's this couple, they go to the mall, they go shopping, and they get separated after a period of time. The husband kind of wanders off, and the wife doesn't see him for like 30 minutes and kind of starts to wonder where he is. And finally an hour goes by, and she has no idea where he is. So she calls him on the phone. He picks the phone up, and she says, "You've been gone for like an hour. Where are you?" And he said, "Well, you remember that jewelry store that we went to last year around Christmas?" She says, "Oh, yeah, I remember that." I mean, she kind of starts to get excited. He says, "You remember it's that store where they had that beautiful diamond necklace that you were looking at and wanted so much?" And she kind of begins to tear up, and her voice begins to kind of choke, and she says, "Oh, yes, I remember it." He said, "Well, I'm in the sporting goods store right next to it." Not a very good move, man, to do that kind of stuff, so... Well, if you'll indulge me as I reminisce here a little bit at the beginning of my talk. Hopefully this won't be too rambling and too personal, but I just wanted to talk a little bit about the Pre-Trib study group, Pre-Trib Research Center. Tommy said, I think maybe other than Tommy, I may have been here more years than anybody. I'm not sure, 31 years, in my 31st year here. And this conference has meant a great deal in my life, and I just want to share a couple things about that. The first year that I was at this conference was the only year, I think, that it's ever been outside of Dallas. It was in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And back in that day, you had to be invited to come, and so Dr. Stanley Toussaint, who'd been one of my professors at DTS, called Tommy and I guess twisted his arm and got me an invite to come. And it was at Kay Arthur's conference center there in Chattanooga. And we had small rooms. We had rooms with a couple of bunk beds in there, and so you roomed with somebody. And my roommate was Ed Heinsohn. And I had no idea who Ed Heinsohn was. He certainly didn't know who I was. And that was the beginning of a friendship that lasted for many, many years. And Ed became a dear friend. We collaborated on a book together. And so that was a beginning of the time here. I've been in 5 locations with this conference. We were at Chattanooga. Then we were over at 635 by Beltline. Then we were at this Embassy Suites over, I got my directions turned around, I think over that way. And then we were over for a few years at the Westin that's kind of catty-cornered from here. It was the Harvey Suites. And then we moved over here some years ago after that. But that very first time I was at the conference in Chattanooga, I sat next to Mart DeHaan. And right behind me were the Feinberg brothers. I mean, that was a formidable force, John and Paul Feinberg back there. And, you think the questioning was rough here earlier. Man, you should have heard those guys when they got on the people. Man, they could get after it. I remember after hearing them with one guy, I thought, I'll never speak at this conference. You couldn't pay me enough money to do that. But over the years, as I would come down here, some of you may know the name Harold Wilmington. Dr. Harold Wilmington's Guide to the Bible. He called it the hernia book. I mean, it's a huge book. It's a good book. He said if you don't like it, you can use it as a doorstop, But Dr. Wilmington, I got to know him. He was at Liberty. He was the second person Jerry Falwell ever hired. He used to come speak at our church that first Sunday in December, and then he and I would drive down here together. And we did that for many years, and as I'm driving down here, I always reminisce and think about Harold Wilmington. He went to be with the Lord a few years ago, but that's right. He was Hal Lindsey's roommate for one semester, the first semester at Dallas Seminary, Dr. Wilmington. So he had a lot of great stories. Just a couple other memories I'll share is when we were over at 635 in Beltline, one of the evenings there, I'd been in my PhD program for I think 2 or 3 years. And Tommy and I started talking as we're wont to do. And so it got late in the evening. Probably we're down there till midnight. And I was talking to Tommy about my dissertation topic, and Tommy suggested the topic to kind of combat preterism of writing on defending the 95 day to the book of Revelation. So in that conversation with Tommy that night there, that was my dissertation topic, where that was born. So again, that's a very fond memory that I have. Also another one is, some of you were here, 17 years ago, seems impossible, it was that long ago. My youngest son was sitting on the front row at that time in the 9th grade. But we had the debate with Hank Hanegraaff here in 2007, so 17 years ago. I think that may still be on the website. I'm there at Pre-Trib. But my best memory here, though, is just all the friends that I've made and the people I've met. I met Tim LaHaye here, Dave Hunt, Robbie Dean, Andy Woods, Mike Vlock, Bill Koenig, Arnold Fruchtenbaum, Don Perkins, Dave Reagan, Steve Sullivan, Randy Price, Joe Bell, and I could go on and on. I mean, I know I leave many names out, but Dr. Walvard used to be here. One of the years I was here, I sat between Dr. Walvard and Dave Breeze. If you don't know who Dave Breeze was, sat right between the two of them. It was probably within a year or two before both of them passed away, and they slept through almost all the conference. But Dr. Walvard one time was dead asleep, and he'd kind of awakened, and literally he'd been awake for maybe a minute or two, and Tommy'd been talking about something with the conference, and he went over and said, Dr. Walvard, and he kind of gave him what the issue was and gave him a microphone, and he went on like a 10-minute, just like it was tape recorded. I mean, perfect. And then he sat back down, and a few minutes later, he was back to sleep again. And so anyway, it's those kind of memories of the people who were here, and Dr. Toussaint used to come. But anyway, all that is just to say that this conference and the people who are here, many of you who are here, and I know some have had to leave already, but you've greatly enriched my life. And I'm very grateful for that. I've learned a great deal from all of you. So I'm very, very thankful for that. Well, let's get to the topic at hand in here today. I want to talk about the Gog-Magog battle, current stage setting. The topic of our conference this year is signs of the times. So I want to delve into the Gog-Magog prophecy a little bit, and then I'm kind of save the stage setting stuff for at the end. I want to talk just a little bit as well about what's going on with Syria right now over there. And I know many of you believe that the Isaiah 17 passage about the destruction of Damascus is a future event. I take it as a past event. I want to talk about that a little bit. So anyway, it'll be a few things mixed in, but I want to mainly focus on this Gog-Magog battle, this current stage setting of what's happening. So I want to focus on two main thoughts. I want to look at the period of this invasion, and I want to look at that because it relates to events today in the Middle East related to peace. So I want to talk about that, and I'll explain where I'm headed on that a little bit later. But this is really the issue of timing or chronology. Now, let me just stop and say this for a moment. This is something I thought of years ago. It's probably not any big original thought, but it was original to me when I thought about it. is all of the main issues in Bible prophecy, again, among people who believe in inerrancy and are true believers, their really main issues are timing issues when you think about that. You think about the whole main view, the kind of main approach you take to prophecy. You have preterists that take all or most of it past, historicists who take it as ongoing and present. You have idealists who take it as timeless. And then you have futurists who take most of these prophecies, like in Revelation 4 and following, to be future. So it's an issue of timing. Then when you come to the millennium, it's an issue of timing. Everybody believes that Jesus is king. Everybody believes Jesus will rule and reign, but it's timing. Is he ruling now? Is it a spiritual reign in heaven or in people's hearts? Or is it future? Is it a future literal earthly reign? Then when you come to the rapture, same issues, timing. If you're a believer, you need to believe in the rapture. As the Bible says, we're going to be caught up to meet the Lord in the air. So we all agree it's going to happen, but it's an issue of timing. So I kind of call it the eschatological funnel. You start out with kind of your main approach, then your view of the millennium, then kind of your view of the rapture. So it's kind of a timing issues. And really it's the same thing when you come to the Ezekiel 38, 39 passage. I'm sure here this morning as I go through this, many of you will have different views on the timing of this invasion. We all agree it's going to happen. There's pretty much agreement about the main players. But again, it's a timing and chronology issue. So that's a good thing to just keep in mind when you study a Bible prophecy. Same thing with even in the book of Revelation, even people that are futurists. Do you take the book sequentially, or is there some kind of recapitulation going on? So timing is a key issue. But then I want to talk just a little bit about the participants, the troops, the coalition that's going to be involved. So let's get into the timing here, the chronology. Again, I'm not going to read the passage. I assume most of you have a pretty good understanding of it. I want to just kind of take it at a little bit a deeper level here. There's three timing clues when it comes to Ezekiel 38, 39, this invasion. Again, if somebody's here and doesn't know what this is, it's an invasion of a group of nations they're going to come into the nation of Israel when they've been regathered. There's three timing clues. In Ezekiel 38:8, you have the word the latter years translated in English. I'm pretty sure that's the only time that phrase is used, those words are used in the Old Testament. Then you have another statement, the last days, in 38:16, that's found 14 times in the Old Testament. That tells us, I think, that this can't have been some past event. Some would even go so far as to say that this indicates it has to be in the tribulation period or at the beginning of the millennium, because this is talking about Israel's latter days or latter years or last days. This isn't the same as the last days for the church. The church of last days is the time between Christ's first coming and his second coming. We're in the last days. People ask, are we living in the last days? The answer is yes. Are we in the last days of the last days? I think it's more the question. But many would say, well, if this has to be in the latter years or the last days for Israel, that's the time period when the time of Jacob's trouble comes. It's the time of the tribulation and beyond. Some would even narrow it down further that way. A second clue is Israel has to be regathered. Obviously, these nations can't invade the Jewish people in their land if they're not there. And the previous chapter is Ezekiel 37, so obviously this is an important timing clue. They have to be regathered to their land. And obviously we know that started in earnest in 1948. 6% of the Jews in the world were there. Today it's somewhere in the 40%, so I think closing in on half the Jews in the world living in the land of Israel today. But the third precondition, this is the one we want to talk about most, is Israel has to be at rest. They have to be at rest. They have to be living securely. The word living securely, that word is used 5 times, you can see there in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And if you look it up again in a lexicon, and hopefully we're not going to have lexical discussions like the last, but it means securely and undisturbed is basically what the word means. The word rest is used in 38:11. And when I looked it up this last week, it's interesting. Several of the meanings, it means to allow one's hands to drop or the drooping of the head. So it's kind of to allow your hands to drop or you droop your head, kind of has the idea of you're at rest or maybe even like asleep. But it means peaceful and undisturbed. So one of the lexicons I looked at had this kind of phrase for all of this statement. It's the peaceful ones living securely. Now, this is really the big issue for the timing, because you have to find a time. Again, we would all agree it's latter years, last days, it's Israel regathered. But when's Israel going to be at rest for this invasion to be fulfilled? And again, a little bit later, I'm going to get to some of the things I think we see happening in our world today that speak to Israel being at rest, at peace, and living securely. But I want to kind of build the foundation before we get there. Now, this is a great chart. I use this chart all the time. Anytime you see me with a chart this good, I didn't make it, so you can be assured of that. This is from Tommy Ice and Tim LaHaye's book on charting the end times. I've added one thing to it, though, that Gog-Magog, where I put that down there, and so that's been added to the chart. But just to kind of get our bearings, we're in the current church age, far left side. One of these days, we believe any moment that the rapture of the church will take place. And it's going to be a great event. We're going to get an airlift accompanied by a facelift. It's going to be a great, great time when the rapture comes. Now, remember, the rapture does not begin the tribulation period. That's a common kind of misconception a lot of people have. The rapture ends the church age. That's the purpose of the rapture. Now, we don't know how long there will be between the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation period. It could be the next day, it could be a month from then, it could be a year later. I don't think it'll be just an extensive period of time, because one of the purposes of the rapture is to deliver us from the coming wrath. If the wrath's too far away, we don't need to be delivered from it. So, there's going to be some time period, though, and that will be a period that you can see there of further preparation or further stage setting. So when the rapture takes place, you can imagine all the stage setting that will occur during that period of time. And then the tribulation will begin, the Antichrist, Daniel 9:27, this one set of 7 years, it will be established. But you notice I just have the Gog-Magog war kind of down there because, again, as we're going to go through some of these ideas of the timing, some people put it even before the rapture. A lot of you I know here put it between the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation. Others put it in the first part of the tribulation, or first half. That's probably the predominant view of folks that are here, I think. So I just kind of put it down there as kind of a placeholder. But we'll go through and talk about some of these different points. I remember in the Left Behind series, the whole Left Behind series begins with this Gog-Magog invasion. So actually in the Left Behind series, it was actually even before the rapture took place. Let me just go through this a little bit. I know many of you are familiar with some of these points, and I'll be interested during the Q&A for some of you, if you think of some points I missed or some weaknesses of some of these views, I'd be glad to hear those. We can collaborate together. But a view that's held by a lot of you here is that this will happen before the tribulation. Now, very few pre-trib people put it before the rapture, because if you do that, you've kind of destroyed imminency. This idea something has to happen. So I think some would say, well, it could happen before the rapture, but they won't be dogmatic about it. But if it's not before the rapture, then somewhere between the rapture and the beginning of the tribulation, in that time of further stage setting. I think, Tommy, that's still the view that you hold. Randy Price, I think, holds that. If anybody doesn't hold that, in the Q&A, you can come and straighten me out. I know it's Arnold Fruchtenbaum's view. Ron Rhodes kind of goes back and forth between putting it before the tribulation or in the first half of the tribulation, but he favors the idea of putting it in between the rapture and the tribulation period. By the way, let me read you something from one of Ron's books that I just read this again this morning. He says, we don't want to be dogmatic and unbending on the issue of the precise timing of the Ezekiel invasion. Many fine scholars have debated this issue through the centuries, and that fact alone is enough to cause one to be humble in the face of this interpretive difficulty. Yes, we should examine the issue and come to our own conclusion, but we should show grace to those who hold a different position. And I like that statement. Ron, he gives a lot, it kind of hedges a lot in what he holds on this. Joel Rosenberg holds this view as well. The strength of this view, obviously, one of them is it coincides and meshes well with Ezekiel 39, verse 9, where the weapons are burned for 7 years. So it fits really well, that taking place. Now, a lot of people who hold this view like to say that this will happen 3.5 years before the tribulation starts. So that way you've got the burning of the weapons ending at the midpoint of the tribulation. Now, again, a lot of them aren't dogmatic about that, but a lot of the folks that hold this view will say, it really would be good if the rapture takes place. There's kind of this long period of stage setting. This happens 3.5 years before the tribulation that allows that 7 years to be over at the midpoint. And, of course, Israel during the last half of the tribulation is under the persecution of the Antichrist. So it coincides and meshes well with Ezekiel 39, verse 7. It also fits best, if it's at least 3.5 years, as I said. It also provides a reasonable explanation for the rebuilding of the temple. The rebuilding of the third temple is a thorny issue. How's that temple going to be built up there? And again, if you hold the view that it's, there where the Dome of the Rock is, how is that going to take place? I am reminded, though, back in the 1800s, there were many Bible teachers, many that are in the stream of dispensationalism that we hold to today, that would say that Israel's going to be regathered to their land someday. And people back then would kind of mock that as like, how the Jewish people are going to get back to their land. Well, it happened. I mean, it's the miracle on the Mediterranean. From 70 nations, 2,000 years dispersed, they're back in their land. And so when people today say, how in the world are you ever going to get a third Jewish temple upon that 36-acre Temple Mount? I would just say, well, God got the Jewish people back there. I mean, it will happen at some point in time. But this view, if you did have, again, we'll talk about this later, a Russian, probably Turkish, Iranian, kind of Islamic coalition invading Israel before the tribulation starts, and their armies are supernaturally wiped out, as Ezekiel 38 and 39 describes, that would obviously give a reasonable explanation for how the temple then could be rebuilt, without causing, World War III, or it could be World War IV at that time. So those are some of the strengths of that view. The weaknesses, and every one of these views have strengths and weaknesses. So we love always to have a view where our view has all strengths and no weaknesses. But what I say about the timing here is to me, you find the view that you like the weaknesses it has the best, is kind of the way I look at it. But the main weakness of this view is, can Israel's condition today or before the tribulation be described as living securely and at rest? That's the issue. Now, those who hold this view believe that it does. They believe that it refers to Israel's confidence in their own strength. They'll say, look at Israel today. They're a strong nation. I mean, they've gone in and, devastated Hamas. They've gotten this ceasefire with Hezbollah. They've gone toe-to-toe with Iran. So, they're at rest and they're living securely. They believe that precondition is in place today and could happen even possibly before the rapture, but after the tribulation period, before that covenant with the Antichrist is made that seems to bring some peace and security. So that's the question. And again, if you hold that view, you would say, well, that's not a weakness, but that's a weakness others would point out with this viewpoint. Again, to me, reading what those words meant earlier, at rest and living securely, it's hard for me to describe or think of Israel today in those terms. But again, others are comfortable with that. That's where they'll place it. Another view is the first half of the tribulation. This was the view of Dr. Pentecost. He put it near the midpoint. Charles Ryrie's view, Charles Dyer, many of you know Charlie Dyer, Dr. Walvoord. It's just a view of many at DTS. The strengths of this view is it provides a solid explanation for Israel's peace and security. Obviously, they're under that Antichrist treaty in Daniel 9:27. Let me read a quote from Dr. Walvoord. It's a little bit long, but it's a good one. He says, there's some hints that provide a good clue as to when this battle will take place. One of the hints given is that the battle takes place at a time when Israel has been regathered into their ancient land and is dwelling securely and at rest. There are not too many times when Israel is at rest in God's prophetic program. They've been scattered and persecuted over the face of the earth, and not even in the future will Israel have many periods of rest. Certainly, Israel is not at rest today. Again, his conclusion, Israel is an armed camp. There's only one period in the future that clearly fits this description of Ezekiel, and this is the first half of Daniel's 70th week of God's program for Israel. Again, Daniel 9:27. Under that covenant, Israel will be able to relax, for their Gentile enemies will have become their friends. That may be a little bit of an overstatement, but apparently guaranteeing their borders and promising them freedom. During that first 3.5 years, we have the one time when regathered Israel is at rest and secure. Apparently, Russia will invade the land of Israel during that period, possibly toward its close, and the scripture will then be fulfilled. So that was a summary there of Dr. Walvoord's view. Another strength of this view is it provides a reasonable scenario for the Antichrist's ascent to world domination at the midpoint of the tribulation. If the armies of Russia and all these Islamic allies are wiped out in Israel sometime before the midpoint of the tribulation, this would cause a massive power vacuum, a dramatic shift in the balance of power that could explain how the Antichrist ascends to world domination as predicted in Revelation 13. Now, the weaknesses of this view, the primary weakness is that it doesn't deal very well with the 7 months of burying the dead and the 7 years of burning the weapons. However, if the invasion occurs at least 1 year before the midpoint of the tribulation, it's possible for the dead bodies to be buried before the Antichrist invades Israel and begins his reign of terror. The burning of the weapons could continue into the beginning of the millennial kingdom. That's what you have to hold if you take this view. I mentioned Ron Rhodes earlier, talking about the burning of these weapons. He said, as long as some Jews, perhaps even a minority, continue to burn the remaining weapons throughout the second half of the tribulation, the prophecy of Ezekiel 39:9 would be fulfilled. My point is that I don't think this problem necessarily deals a death blow to the idea that the Ezekiel invasion could occur in the tribulation. So, he doesn't think this is a strength of it, certainly, but he doesn't think it deals a death blow to it. And Dr. Arnold Fruchtenbaum, he questions, and this is a good point Arnold makes, why would God intervene on Israel's behalf by wiping out the invading army near the middle of the tribulation, only to unleash the events of the second half of the tribulation that bring great destruction to Israel? Why would he intervene to do that? And again, there could be explanations for that, but that's a good point as well. The weaknesses of this view is that Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is before the millennium. Whereas, I'm sorry, did I skip one here? Something must have gotten out of order here. Oh, well, I missed a heading there, I'm sorry. This is the next view. That I must have had a couple slides that got out of here. Anyway, the next view is that Gog and Magog is the Battle of Armageddon. It's the same thing as Armageddon. I think that's what I'm referring to here. Those two are to be equated with one another. The strength of that is they both mention a bird supper. The animals come and feed on the carnage there. It's kind of a parallel. The weakness is Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39 is before the millennium. It's described in Ezekiel 40 to 48, the temple there and the land divided. Whereas in Revelation 7 to 10, well, I think I actually skipped a few maybe, the battle of Gog and Magog after the millennium described in Revelation 21 to 6. This is actually, gosh, I must have skipped several slides. Let me see if they got out of order or something. Okay. Well, anyway, the view that it's Armageddon, the problem with making this Armageddon is that at the end of the tribulation period, we could say that's the one time when Israel won't be at peace and living securely. That's a massive problem, I think, for that view. The other view, the view there now that this is showing the weaknesses of, is many people put it at the end of the millennium. Let me just go ahead and mention this. I didn't put it in the slideshow. Obviously, I didn't put a couple other things in here, too, that I had earlier. I don't know where they disappeared to. But some even put it at the beginning of the millennium. That's a very unusual view. It's not out there much. But Arno Gaebelein held that view. Because Gaebelein held that when Christ comes back, the judgment of the nations will take a period of time. It's going to happen all at once. And that just like there was kind of David's reign that was kind of more warfare, and then Solomon's reign that was more peaceful, that Christ's reign is going to begin with warfare and then end with this Solomonic kind of period. So he saw it actually at the beginning of the millennium as kind of an extended kind of judgment of the nations. What's that? Oh, that's Dave Hunt's view. Okay. Yeah, it's interesting. Not many people hold that. I remember reading it years ago, and I actually remember Dr. Walvoord was speaking at our church before I went to seminary. And in typical Dr. Walvoord fashion, I said, I was reading Arno Gaebelein, and he had this view, and I explained it all to him. I said, what do you think about that? And he said, he's wrong. That's what Dr. Walvoord was saying. It's a matter of fact. Now, this point here is for the end of the millennium. People put it at the end of the millennium because that's the other place you have Gog and Magog mentioned in Revelation 20, verses 7 to 10. I call that the second coming of Satan, when he's released from the abyss and goes out and gathers armies from around the earth. And again, the strength of that is it's Gog, Magog in both places. The weakness is that Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39, this is what I was saying a minute ago, is before the millennium. In Ezekiel 40 to 48 follows that, which is describing this millennial temple. Whereas in Revelation 27 to 10, the Battle of Magog is after the millennium, described in 21 to 6. Also in Ezekiel 38, specific nations are mentioned. In Revelation 20, the coalition is the nations which are in the four corners of the earth. But a lot of people wonder, how is John using Gog and Magog then? I think he's just using it in kind of a shorthand sense to say this is going to be Gog and Magog all over again. It could be used in the sense of you have World War I and World War II. It's kind of like you had Gog and Magog one. This is another Gog and Magog, I think is the way that John's using that probably in Revelation chapter 20. This is number 2 here. In Ezekiel 38, the bodies of Gog and his troops are burned for 7 months, and the weapons are burned for 7 years after the battle. Yet in Revelation 20 to 21, the great white throne, the new heaven and new earth, and the eternal state immediately follow the final battle of Gog and Magog. So that post-millennial view would require the burying and the burning to continue into the eternal state, which seems pretty unlikely. So that's kind of just a survey of these views. But again, I want to just back up and say, remember, the focus we're thinking about here is when is Israel at rest and living securely? And how's that going to happen? Because any view you take, you have to account for that fact or for that point. So what are some explanations of the timing of Israel being at rest and living securely? Well, again, many would say that Israel's current condition fulfills this requirement. So, Israel's at rest or living securely today. It's looking at Israel's confidence, in themselves and their strength. Again, that's a difficult one for me to swallow, the way things are currently, but that's the way people, put it even before the rapture or before the tribulation would take this. Others would say, well, Israel's going to be at rest and living securely because there's going to be a Psalm 83 war. There's going to be this Psalm 83 war that's going to take place where Israel's going to defeat the near enemies. When you think about Gog and Magog, many of you have heard this before, that's kind of the outer ring of nations that are Israel's enemies. You have Russia and Iran and Turkey, Libya, Sudan. These are kind of the farthest nations kind of in the circle around Israel. But you have kind of then this inner ring of nations that aren't mentioned in Ezekiel 38. You have Jordan and Saudi Arabia and Lebanon and Syria and Egypt and others. So many believe that this Psalm 83 war will be what accounts for the peace and the security there in Israel. And they believe that could happen at any time. So Israel will defeat those enemies. They'll become strong and powerful. They'll be at rest and living securely. And so that can account for how this event could happen even before the tribulation period begins. I don't hold to a separate Psalm 83 war. I think it's possible the Psalm 83 nations could be part of Ezekiel 38 and 39. You get down to, after it lists all the nations in Ezekiel 38:6, it says, many peoples with you, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. But I don't hold to a Psalm 83 war. It's just kind of mentioning to me all the kind of the perennial enemies of Israel, this song of Asaph, that they're going to be destroyed someday. One thing that I can say for sure is Psalm 83 never gives any indication of when that's going to happen. Like in Ezekiel, they have to be regathered. So the latter years, the last days, they have to be at rest and living securely. So Psalm 83 never gives any kind of timing clues of when it's going to happen. Some will say, well, the Psalm 83 war has to be before Ezekiel 38 and 39 and all those things. It's like, well, but it never tells you in the text when it happens. So I don't hold to a separate Psalm 83 war. I know some of you do, but I'm just saying that's how some people would explain Israel being at rest and living securely if they hold to this kind of separate Psalm 83 war. Another explanation, this is the one that I read from Dr. Walvard earlier, is that the way you explain the arrest and the living securely is the Antichrist treaty in Daniel 9:27. Again, that's what's made sense to many people, is we know that for some period of time, it appears, during the first part of the tribulation, that first half, that Israel seems to let down her guard. There's kind of this guaranteed peace from the Antichrist. And so that's what's drawn many people to that first half of the tribulation, because that's a good explanation for how they'll be at rest and living securely. Now, to kind of move in a little bit now on this point, at least the timing, to the stage setting kind of part of what I want to talk about, or signs of the times, some would say, well, Israel may, in the not too distant future, again, if you take that they're not at rest and living securely now, that President Trump's election and kind of the peace plan and all these things will maybe come in the wake of his election could bring that kind of a sustained peace to Israel. So, we've all been watching the news. And by the way, again, I'll talk about Syria here in a bit. But, President Trump's he's president-elect still, but you've already had, Hamas making overtures now to what will be his incoming administration for peace, for hostages. We've had the ceasefire with Hezbollah. You have both Russia and Ukraine. I could put all kinds of headlines up here. I didn't do that, but both of them, trying to approach President Trump now, talking about a peace agreement. It is interesting. The fighting there has gotten more serious because both of them are trying to get as much leverage as they can before the peace negotiations start. You have all the land you can have, so you have more to bargain with. So we see that situation ratcheting up. I read an article the other day, so tragic. I mean, it breaks my heart when I read it. Just that they called it the Russian meat grinder, just sending waves of troops, people being slaughtered over there, both sides. It's tragic. But they're trying to take all the land they can because they know that peace is going to be probably demanded in the not too distant future. But here's just one article from Time, just about a month ago. Donald Trump's return could bring a more peaceful Middle East. And there was 3 points in this article that said, President Trump may do these things. He can choke Iranian revenues and funding of regional terrorist groups through the long overdue reinforcement of oil sanctions. The last administration, the current administration, gave Iran a bunch of money back again. One of the worst things you can ever do for a terrorist country. You're going to choke that off, which again can lead to a more peaceful Middle East. Stop Iran's pursuit of a nuclear weapon, which I've read recently, and again, these are credible places, that Iran has enough now highly enriched uranium, enough fissile material for 12 nuclear weapons. Now, they don't have the technology or everything to put it on a ballistic missile yet and fire it, but people keep wondering, have they crossed the nuclear threshold? Have they not? There's difference of opinion, but the most optimistic thing I've seen is that they're 1 to 2 weeks away from it. Well, if you're 1 to 2 weeks away, you're there. So this is a big issue, and again, I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes when we get to Syria, but let me go ahead and say it now. Iran right now is very isolated. This whole situation in Syria has caused them, I think, panic. I think a couple of reasons. One is, I think the regime change you just saw in Syria, they fear that it could happen there. Remember when the Arab Spring broke out? You remember in 2011? Mubarak in Egypt, he was deposed. Gaddafi in Libya was deposed as well. So I think there's a lot of fear there. But basically, Iran has had 2 major forms of deterrence. They've had ballistic missiles. Well, they fired a ton of those into Israel, and that didn't work out very well. And they've had mainly Hezbollah. They have their whole terror network, but primarily Hezbollah that's right on Israel's northern border. Well, Hezbollah now has been totally neutralized, it would appear, and has this ceasefire with Israel. So many are saying, Iran is greatly escalating their nuclear program because that's going to be all that they really have as a deterrence. So we see that happening, and that could easily cause Israel or possibly Israel and the United States, after President Trump is elected, to do something major there to eliminate that Iranian nuclear threat. But the third point here is President Trump's plan is to extend the Abraham Accords, build a strong coalition of allies to counter the axis of evil. That would be Iran and its the nations in its orbit, and facilitate a better life for the Palestinian people. The normalization of relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia has been called the deal of the century. And I know the Biden administration has worked hard on that. I think it will probably happen during President Trump's administration. No, the ultimate deal of the century, probably the deal of the millennium, will be when the Antichrist finally comes along and brings his peace. But that would be the deal of the century. So many people are saying, look, there's going to be a time of peace coming to the Middle East like we've not seen before because of President Trump's election. I'm sure a lot of you heard this. This was just a few days ago. This was in Newsweek. It says, Donald Trump warns of hell to pay amid Middle East hostage crisis. President-elect Trump issued a stark warning Monday over the ongoing hostage crisis in Gaza as regional tensions escalated with the first reported Hezbollah attack since implementation of a ceasefire along Israel's northern border. In a message posted to his Truth Social platform, Trump demanded immediate release of all hostages held by Hamas, warning of unprecedented retaliation if the order goes unheeded by his inaugural date of January 20th. And this is what he put there on Truth Social. Please let this truth serve to represent that if the hostages are not released prior to January 20th, 2025, and I think he's referring mainly to American hostages, the date I proudly assume office of President of the United States, there will be all hell to pay in the Middle East. Adding that those responsible will be hit harder than anybody has been hit in the long and storied history of the United States of America. Release the hostages now. So it's kind of this idea of threatening people and saying, look, you better get these things done, and you better make way for peace, or there's going to be hell to pay. It's interesting in that Newsweek article, it ended with this sentence. Now again, this is just someone's opinion that wrote the article, but a new dawn and new era of peace and prosperity could be on the horizon in the Middle East with Trump's return. Now, of course, with what's happening in Syria right now, there's a lot of twists and turns, but it's interesting that there's this kind of new optimism. Now, having said all that, I want to make it clear, I'm not saying that Donald Trump is the Antichrist. In fact, I'll say categorically, he's not the Antichrist. There's a guy that keeps sending me stuff every so often that we just elected the Antichrist in America. He sends me these. I haven't responded to it, but we know he's not the Antichrist for several reasons. One is Daniel 9:26 says that the Antichrist will be of the people who destroyed the temple. This prince will be from the people who destroy the temple in Jerusalem. Now, I don't think that necessarily means he's an Italian, but I think it means that he's from the confines of the old Roman Empire. He'll rise from a reunited or revived Roman Empire. That's really the only verse I know of that kind of gives his origin, where he'll be from. So I don't think he'll be an American. He won't be any American president. Also, my understanding would be he won't appear until after the rapture takes place, because I take the removal of the restrainer in 2 Thessalonians 2 to be the church empowered by God's Spirit, and the church has to be removed, and the Spirit has to be removed in the sense of empowering the church before the man of lawlessness can be revealed. So that's why, many of you have heard this before, that's why we believe that Satan always has an Antichrist ready in every generation, because he doesn't know when he's going to be able to bring his man on the scene. It also tells us that Satan is defeated before he ever begins, because he has to wait for God to remove the restraining influence for him to bring his man on the scene. But the chronology there is the restrainer's removed, the man of lawlessness comes on the scene, and then the day of the Lord begins. So to use Ed Heinzen's famous old saying that I loved, he says, I'm going to tell you, if you ever do figure out who the Antichrist is, I got bad news, you've been left behind. So that was Ed's statement. I love that. He used to always say that, as only Ed could say it. So I don't think he'll appear until after the rapture. And remember, when the Antichrist appears, he begins insignificantly. Donald Trump's been on the world scene for years as, a business person and all of that. He's called, the first time I think the Antichrist is clearly referred to in the Bible is in Daniel 7:8. He's called there a little horn who comes up among the 10. So he's someone who's obscure in beginning and then begins to rise quickly to power. And the other thing is, it seems like as you read about the Antichrist in the Bible, that we could describe him as a smooth-talking flatterer. Donald Trump does not fit that description. Sometimes he may be smooth talking, but he is not a flatterer. I think we could all agree with that. So he's not the Antichrist. But again, God uses human instruments, and it could be that through Donald Trump, again, we'll see that a lot of this, if a lot of major peace initiatives are forged there in the Middle East, that could be a preview of what's coming. And it could set the stage for that Gog-Magog invasion to occur before the tribulation starts. Because you'd have a peace and safety before the Antichrist even comes on the scene. Just a word about this passage here, Daniel 9:27. The NIV says, he, I put in there, the coming Antichrist will confirm a covenant with many for 1/7. That's where we get the 7-year tribulation primarily, this idea of a covenant between Antichrist and the many in Israel. The ESV says he'll make a strong covenant with many for 1 week. And many of you probably are aware of this. The word that's used there could have the idea of the Antichrist when he comes on the scene might confirm covenants or agreements that already exist, or strengthen agreements that already exist. Or it could be that he comes and makes a strong covenant, which could carry the idea of a compelled covenant. The word can mean to be strong or to overpower, to exert oneself. So the Antichrist may come, and he'll have so much power and dwelled by Satan as he is, that he'll be able to come and force people to the peace table. It'll be it won't be a take it or leave it deal. It'll be a take it and love it deal. But again, it's possible that there will be framework in place that he will simply come onto the scene and he will strengthen. He'll make strong and confirm a lot of things that are already in place. So either one of those could fit what we see today. So again, it can denote the idea of enforcing or making strong a covenant. In other words, he might enforce or confirm or make strong a treaty that already exists. It can also carry the idea of a force or compelled covenant or treaty. By the way, one thing I wanted to mention real quickly is, think about this. Daniel wrote this over 2,500 years ago, and he foresaw the exact scenario that's happening today. Same thing with Ezekiel. Daniel and Ezekiel are contemporaries. And we just always need to pause and remind ourselves of how much confirmation there is that the Bible is divine in origin. Can you read the book of Ezekiel 38 and 39? These are the nations that we see in the news every day today. And we just hear constant clamoring, and yearning for peace over there in that part of the world. And that's exactly what the Bible says. Now, I don't base my eschatological view on current events, but it is interesting that the view that we hold, the current events are lining up with that. And if someone's an amillennialist, or doesn't believe in a future for Israel, there's 7 million Jews in Israel today. Why are they there? By accident? Most of these amillennialists are strong Calvinists. They just in Israel by luck. No, they're there by God's will. So again, we don't want to develop our prophecy view from current events. We want to do it the other way around. But it is interesting how many of these things that we see in Scripture are lining up and consistent with the view that we take. So that's a bit there about the timing and just how things could be set up for that. Now let me talk about, for a few minutes here, the participants in this Gog-Magog invasion. You could call this the troops or the coalition. So the first thing you have here is in Ezekiel 38, 1-6, you have 10 proper names. It begins with Gog and Magog and so on, Rosh. The first name here that's important is Gog. There's different ideas about what Gog means. Some think Gog means like mountain or a height, which would speak of this person's pride. Others believe that it carries the idea of darkness. But Gog is mentioned 11 times in Ezekiel 38 and 39, and we know that Gog is a person. The other 9 names are places. We know Gog's a person because he's called a prince, and he's directly addressed by God. So Gog clearly is the one here that's unique. Gog's a person. He's the leader of this invasion. Now, I thought I'd put this in here. Many of you, I'm sure, have seen this. It's been out there for a while, but I love this quote from Joel Rosenberg. He says, over the years, people have asked me if Putin might be the Russian dictator referred to as Gog in the biblical prophecies of Gog and Magog in Ezekiel 38 and 39. Here's my quick answer. It's too soon to draw such a conclusion. There's much more that would have to happen to indicate that Putin was the Gog of Bible prophecy. But there's no question in my mind that Putin is Gog-esque. Now, I like that. That's a good way to put it. He's dangerous, and both Israel and the West should keep a close and wary eye on him. And by the way, he wrote this years ago, especially given all that Putin has done to build a strategic alliance between Russia and Iran and the other countries mentioned in the Gog-Magog prophecies. So, we don't know who Gog is, but I do think if you want to look like a Gog-like person or somebody who's Gog-esque, Vladimir Putin surely is a good candidate for that. Now, again, most of you are familiar with the coalition. You have Magog that's mentioned. This was the ancient Scythians. They kind of were in the southern part of Russia, a lot of the area of Central Asia, where, I call those nations the stands, Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, and so on. Some believe that Ukraine may be part of this as well. You have Rosh that's mentioned. Now, of course, there's always the issue, is Rosh there, is it an adjective or a noun? Because it's used many, many times in the Bible. Rosh just means head or chief. So many of your translations won't have the word Rosh there, translated as Rosh. They'll have Gog of the land of Magog, the chief prince of Meshech and Tubal. So they'll translate the word Rosh as chief. But the New American Standard, several other English translations, the Septuagint, I believe, also has that. As Ros. There were a people back then called the Ros, the Ras, the Rasapu. There's been a lot of work done on this, and so I do think it refers to Russia. And we're not, when we look on a map today, we're not looking for Magog or Rosh or Meshech or Tubal. We're looking for the modern counterparts to these places. So, this was written in 570 BC. They've changed names maybe many times throughout the centuries. We're looking for the modern counterparts to these places. You have Meshech, Tubal. The Schofield Bible had Moscow and Tobolsk, but again, if you look it up in geographical sources in that day, historical sources, Meshech, Tubal, Gomer, and Togarmah are all 4 in modern-day Turkey. Persia, of course, is Iran. The name was changed from Persia to Iran in March of 1935. Became the Islamic Republic of Iran in 1979. Cush, some translations have Ethiopia, but Cush was the nation to the south of Egypt, modern-day Sudan, which is northern Sudan's a radical Islamic nation. Put, modern-day Libya, which has been in mass chaos since Muammar Gaddafi was deposed in 2011 during the Arab Spring. It's been splintered into all kinds of rival factions, and Russia's very involved there. Interesting. There's a lot of oil there. And again, you have Gomer, you have Togarmah. But then notice here it mentions many peoples with you. So this is kind of a catch-all, I think, that indicates to us that the list here is not intended to be exhaustive. It's not intended to be all-inclusive. So many peoples with you. So kind of put a map up here and think about this. These are kind of, again, often looked at as kind of the farther enemies of the land of Israel. And so many wonder, well, who are these many peoples with you who are within the nation of Israel who are going to come against Israel during this time? And again, some take the Psalm 83 war. There's all kinds of different thoughts about that. But I want to just share a couple of things. The main enemies really that are mentioned, the 3 main ones for the nations are Turkey. But you look at Israel down there, you can see where Israel is. It's kind of down over there just south of Turkey a little ways up the Sinai Peninsula. But see how small Israel, you got Turkey, you got Iran, and you got Russia. It's at 12 time zones or something, massive. So you have tiny Israel. These seem to be the 3 key main players. And it's fascinating when you look at our world today and look at the news, you hear about these 3 nations again and again and again. You hear about them all the time. Now, these are the 3 key main players in that part of the world. There's a lot we could say today about Iran, and I'm going to say some of the things now related to kind of what's happened with Syria. But I want to come back in a little bit, and I do want to talk about Isaiah 17 and about the Damascus prophecy. I'll talk about that in a few minutes. But with Iran, we all know that Iran is the chief sponsor of terror in the world. Again, they're either at the nuclear threshold and right at it, they've crossed it. But again, they're isolated today. They're trying to cross the nuclear finish line. But Iran, what's happened in Syria with the toppling of the Bashar al-Assad regime is a terrible blow to Iran. It's shattering a lot of their terror network. They still have the Houthis. Hamas is basically finished. They're in Gaza. Hezbollah now is in the ceasefire with Israel, but they funneled weapons through Syria to get to Hezbollah. And so this has been a huge blow to them. This main artery that they have has really been taken away. So you had this group called HTS, this rebel coalition, 30,000 fighters. They were an affiliate of Al-Qaeda until 2017. They're the ones who've come in and who've taken over Syria and deposed or ousted Assad. The Assad regime been there for 54 years. This is, again, a major blow to Iran, what's taken place there. This is kind of the finishing off of the Arab Spring. The civil war started in Syria in 2011. It's gone on 13 years. Brutal, brutal civil war finally has come to an end. And this has been a real difficulty for Iran. So I actually heard a commentator, a military commentator, just yesterday, a very reputable person. He said, right now, and between now and President Trump is sworn in, he said, this is a perilous period. Because some of these nations could be looking at this and thinking, this is our window of opportunity. You take these Syrian forces that came down and toppled the Assad regime, they seized a window of opportunity. Russia's busy over in Ukraine, has their hands full. Iran is tied up thinking about what they're going to do with Israel and with the situation in Hezbollah. And so they seized that opportunity to come down into Syria. And again, this also relates to the whole peace issue. I remember Henry Kissinger years ago, he made a statement, I've never forgotten it. He said, there can be no peace without Syria. His famous comment was, there can be no war without Egypt, and there can be no peace without Syria. But there can be no peace without Syria. So it's interesting, the Assad regime, obviously an avowed enemy of Israel. We don't know how it will play out there, but again, this could play into the peace issue and also the nations involved. You also have Turkey. Basically, in this toppling of the Assad regime, there's winners and losers. Two of the big losers are Iran and Russia. Russia has a naval base there. Just a few days ago, lots of those ships left. It's still, up in the air what's going to happen to these Russian bases that are there. So Iran and Russia are massive losers. One of the big winners has been Israel. Did you know Israeli troops are on Syrian soil today for the first time since 1973? They've flown planes into there, but they've gone and taken that backside of Mount Hermon, and they're building a large buffer zone there because, again, they don't know what these terror groups that have come and taken over, they don't know what they want to do. So it's been a huge win for them. Also, Israel has used this as an opportunity to go in and bomb weapons depots in Syria, take out planes, go and hit places where chemical weapons are stored. So they're having a field day going in and destroying a lot of these places. So it's been a huge boon for them. But it's also been a great boost for Turkey. Now remember, Turkey, led by Erdogan said, this was back in July, that Turkey might enter Israel to help the Palestinians. Now, I think that was all bluster, probably just a bluff, but still, it was a serious statement he made. And just about a month ago, Newsweek reports Turkey cuts off relations with Israel. So he's an avowed enemy of Israel as well. And so this has been a huge benefit to them, though, because Russia and Iran basically are out. Turkey shares a 560-mile border with Syria. And they effectively control a lot of northern Syria. So this is a huge benefit to them. But again, we looked at before and said, wow, this really fits the Gog-Magog because Russia and Iran are right there in Syria. Well, they're out now, but who took the place? Turkey. So they're another one of the Gog-Magog nations. Just this last week, I was reading an article that Turkey and Russia and Iran, their representatives all met in Doha, which is the capital of Qatar, to discuss retreating, getting out of what was going to happen in Syria. So again, it's still these three nations that we see over and over again collaborating together with one another. Now, this is as good a place as any. I just thought I would talk about what's going on in Syria a little bit more. I want to talk about Isaiah 17. And again, this is not going to be any great final statement about this, but I just want to point out a couple of things because I know that many of you here hold that Isaiah 17 is a future prophecy of the destruction of Damascus. It hasn't happened yet. Now, before I say anything about it, let me just say this. In the prophets, the three major prophets, you have sections about the nations, about how God's going to deal with the nations. And in Isaiah, it's chapters 13 to 23. In Ezekiel, it's chapters 25 to 32. And in Jeremiah, well, you have it in Jeremiah, you have in chapters 46 to 52. So you have these large sections of the nations. And I think one of the most difficult things in eschatology and prophecy is some of these passages here determining when they were, if they've been fulfilled in the past or if they're still future. Some of them, I think almost everyone would have to agree, have been fulfilled in the past. There's also things in there that most people would agree have not been fulfilled. So I'd never be dogmatic about it. These are difficult passages, I think, because of the setting that they're in. But let me just give you a few thoughts about Isaiah 17. Let me just read verse 1, the oracle concerning Damascus. Behold, Damascus is about to be removed from being a city, become a fallen ruin. The cities of Aurora are forsaken. There'll be the flocks to lie down. There'll be no one to frighten them. So most people, when they read it, they just stop right there. And they think Israel is going to hit Damascus with a nuclear attack someday. Israel's going to go take Syria out. There's all these different scenarios. Kind of when Syria is in the news, there's going to be something that's going to fulfill this prophecy. The difficulty with that to me is as you look at the surrounding context. If you begin reading at verse 3, it says, the fortified city will disappear from Ephraim. That's northern Israel. That was the name often given to the 10 northern tribes. So whenever Damascus is destroyed, northern Israel is going to be destroyed as well. And so again, this is just highlighting the importance of putting a text in its context, I believe. They'll disappear from Ephraim's sovereignty, from Damascus, the remnant of Aram. They'll be like the glory of the sons of Israel, declares the Lord. It'll come about in that day that the glory of Jacob will fade, and goes on to describe all of this. So whenever you put this, at the same time something bad happens to Damascus, in the near time around it, something bad has to happen in northern Israel as well. The other thing is, if you go back to chapter 16, the end of chapter 16, there's a prophecy there that we know was fulfilled in the near term. Because look at chapter 16, verse 14. But now the Lord speaks, saying, within 3 years, as a hired man would count them, the glory of Moab will be degraded, along with all his great population, and his remnant will be very small and impotent. So you've got a prophecy there about Moab. He says within 3 years, Moab's going to get wiped out. Well, then you go right into this prophecy about Damascus. Well, if the Moab prophecy was fulfilled in the near future, then you read right into the prophecy about Damascus. It leads me to think this is a near fulfilled prophecy as well. The other thing is, if you look down at the end of the chapter 17 of Isaiah, he says in verse 13, the nations rumble on like the rumbling of many waters. He will rebuke them, and they will flee far away and be chased like chaff in the mountains before the wind, or like whirling dust before a gale. Notice what it says, verse 14. At evening time there is terror. He's talking about the people who've come against Damascus and against Ephraim. Before morning they are no more. Such will be the portion of those who plunder us and the lot of those who pillage us. Well, you go further into Isaiah 36 and 37, what do you find happens to the Assyrian army? 185,000 of them are killed in one night. So to me, if you have right before the destruction of Damascus, Moab is going to be destroyed in 3 years. And at the end of the passage, you have a statement about the Assyrian army being wiped out in one night. Both of those were near events. So it makes sense to me that what's in between them was a near event as well. And we do know that Damascus was destroyed by Tiglath-Pileser, the Assyrian king, in 732 BC. I quoted Harold Honer earlier, Dr. Honer. I loved Dr. Honer. He was one of my readers on my dissertation. But he had a dog, a pet dog, when I was in seminary, and his dog was named Tiglath-Pileser. So only a seminary professor would name a dog. I think they called him Tiggy for short, but anyway, old Tiglath-Pileser. But it also, notice it doesn't say in verse 1, Damascus is going to be removed from being a city forever. It just says it's going to be removed from being a city. It's going to be destroyed, which happened in 732 BC. And in 722 BC, the northern part of Israel was destroyed. Samaria, you remember, was taken, and the northern kingdom was taken away into captivity. So that fits as well with northern Israel and Samaria being taken around the same time that Damascus is being destroyed here. So I think, to me, that's the way I would understand this prophecy. So I wouldn't see this as a future prophecy about Syria. You know, sometimes people will say, well, what do you think is going to happen to Syria in the future? Well, the Bible doesn't say. Syria could be part of the many peoples with you that are mentioned in Ezekiel 38, verse 6. Again, we're not told what's going to happen to every nation in the future, but I wouldn't use Isaiah 17 myself personally for that. But anyway, during the Q&A, if you have some comments about that or questions or thoughts, I'd love to hear those. But anyway, that kind of leads me into this statement that I just talked about. Of Ezekiel 38, verse 6, talks about many peoples with you. And I think we can see some stage setting for that. Again, I think this tells us, again, the list of nations that are going to invade. It's not exhaustive. It can include this inner ring of nations. But it also, I just thought of this not long ago, the many peoples with you could include the axis of resistance, these Iranian proxies. Gaza, the Hamas in Gaza, Hezbollah in Lebanon. It could include Syria. Could include Iraq, the numerous militia groups that are there, supported by the Shiite groups supported by Iran. The West Bank, the Houthis in Yemen. So when you read Ezekiel 38 and you come to many peoples with you, we don't know who that is, but it could be, again, that inner ring of nations, which would include some of these. It could include some of the axis of resistance, these Iranian proxies. But here's another thought. I just thought of this the other day as I was doing some reading. Russia is recruiting all kinds of mercenaries to fight their battle in Ukraine, to fight their war. They're running out of troops, so they're bringing people in. They're bringing in Yemenis, fighters from Yemen. Russia has recruited hundreds, the article I read said, of Houthi fighters to come in and help in Ukraine. North Korea, there are 11,000 North Korean troops that have come to help with Russia. Now, I read an article, interestingly, now North Korea wants fighter jets from Russia. So North Korea didn't do this for nothing. There's always a payback. So, and they signed a big agreement, North Korea and Russia did recently. This was what astounded me. 15,000 fighters have been recruited from Nepal to go fight for Russia and Ukraine. And it's tragic. The article I read pointed out that many of these Nepalese fighters are coming back to Nepal wounded, beaten, all kinds of traumatic stress because they didn't know. Now, they should have probably thought this through, but they were sent to the very front lines. And you just think about these people. You have a terrible life. They're going to go, hey, we're going to go make some money and go fight in this battle, and the toll that it took on them. So, let me just add this, and all I'm saying here, we need to be praying about a lot of this stuff when we see this. These aren't just, distant events that are happening. I mean, these are real people involved in these places and these wars and these countries that are so oppressive. I don't know about you, man. Every time I read about, the Russian war with Ukraine, I want to pray for the people who are there. Again, it's not just it's prophecy. We love to talk about these things. It points towards what's coming, but still real people are involved in these things. And we certainly wouldn't want to be in that with our family. So kind of all this is simply to say this, and again, there's much more we could say, but current events point toward the Gog-Magog. Well, you all already knew that before you came in here, but hopefully a few of these things help shed a little more light on this. The timing of this invasion could be after the rapture, but before the tribulation begins. If that precondition of rest and security is in place, as some already believe, or that could come about from a lot of these peace initiatives that are taking place before the Antichrist even shows up. Or it could be in the early part of the tribulation when Israel is under its treaty with the Antichrist. But either way, I think we can see that the coalition and all the conditions that are necessary are coalescing right before our eyes. I think I can say that much with some certainty. Well, as I close here and before we go to some questions, I just want to mention quickly, a lot of you know the name Robert Murray McCheyne. He was a Scottish Presbyterian preacher, died at the age of 29. By the way, he was a lover of Israel, visited Israel, godly Israel-loving Presbyterian. But he died at the age of 29 in 1943. He had a watch that he always wore. I always loved this. Engraved on the face of the watch were these three words, "The night cometh." And it was a reminder to him. He wanted that there so that every time he checked his watch, he was reminded the time was marching on to the end. The night cometh. And of course, the good news for us is we believe that before the night cometh, Jesus cometh. So that's the good news for us. But I think it's need to have those reminders in our lives constantly, though, that time is marching on. And to be about God's business in our lives, our families, to love our spouse, our children, to be involved in our churches, to be good stewards of the money that God's given us. If we really believe these things, we need to live our lives with a sense of purpose and intentionality and a sense of urgency. And so I pray that all of us will do that. We're gonna scatter here in a little bit and go all of our various places where God has us. But I pray that we'll take that sense of urgency and intentionality with us and be reminded that time marches on. Well, thank you. We'll take some questions now. No questions about Hebrew prepositions for me.
Go ahead, number one.
Yes. Yeah, hi. Fantastic talk. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Seasoned with salt, full of grace. Very well informed. Enjoyed it all. My question, one question and one observation. The question is, as far as identifying Scythia, which, Scythia technically no longer exists.
Right.
Do you try to identify them more genetically, ethnically, geographically, culturally?
It's more just geographically. Yeah, I agree. There were, you have it in the Bible, either June or Scythian, it's in Scripture. It's an ethnic group, but they just kind of roamed a large area, in southern Russia, Central Asia. Yeah. So that's where that mainly comes from. That's why when you come to like Magog, that's why there's so much difference of opinion about where was Magog. Because a lot of people relate that to the Scythians. But again, exactly where were they all? They're kind of nomadic, roaming. They rode horses, or very, very great horsemen. So we don't really know. That's the thing about some of these places. Some of them are very easy to pinpoint. I would say that probably Magog is the most difficult one. And of course, you have the issue with Rosh. Is it a noun or an adjective? But with Magog, that's where I would see that.
Yeah, and the observation, since you invited discussion of some of the other views of when this invasion will occur.
I'd love to hear that.
Yeah, I happen to be taking a course in eschatology, lectures by Dr. Ice, incidentally, and I'm writing a paper on this same topic.
Good.
I'm finding myself surprised that I'm leaning towards the early millennium position, which not just Dave Hunt and Arno Gaebelein, there's also a few of the early Plymouth Brethren who took that position as well.
Yeah, he was among them, Gaebelein, a lot of them did.
Yeah.
So was Dave Hunt, brethren.
Yeah, that's right.
True. Yep. Right. So just an observation. I think one of the reasons that dispensationalists veer away from an early millennium position is they say, talk about the new temple begins in Ezekiel 40. And so there's an assumption made, like if you look at Ezekiel chronologically, everything prior to chapter 40 would be pre-mill, and then chapter 40, where it starts talking about the new temple, is where the millennium begins. Some people hold that view. I'm not advocating that view. In fact, I'm going to suggest I don't find it very persuasive, because that revelation that was given to Ezekiel was 7 or 8 years after the previous revelation, which included Ezekiel 32 through 39.
But you do have support, yeah. I mean, I looked at that view. That's why when I was younger, I told you I read Gabeline, and I went and asked Dr. Walford, because he said it's wrong, so I just took it as wrong then, because he said that. But no, not really. But no, you do have it. But in chapter 39, at the end of it, you have in verse 25, therefore thus says the Lord, now I'll restore the fortunes of Jacob, have mercy on the whole house of Israel, I'll be jealous for my name. That's a lot of what Gabeline pointed out. Verse 29, there before you even get to chapter 40, I'll not hide my face from them any longer, I'll have poured out my spirit on the house of Israel, declares the Lord. So, Gabeline kind of held to a Davidic time of Christ's kingdom, and then a Solomonic time, and kind of more of a process there. By the way, I don't know what happened on my PowerPoint. I was over there working. I was over there, had it ready, and I also skipped another view of the time. And let me just go ahead and mention it right now, because I reminded myself of it. There's a view that a two-phase view of the Gog-Magog invasion. That was held by Dr. Honer, Harold Honer at DTS. He held that Ezekiel 38 was in the early part of the tribulation, and Ezekiel 39 was at the end. It fits in with Armageddon and with the burning of the weapons. Dr. Ralph Alexander, in that Everyman commentary series, he holds that view, but he saw a partial fulfillment. I don't really like partial fulfillments or double fulfillment. I don't like that term. He saw a fulfillment in the beginning of the tribulation and a fulfillment at the end of the tribulation. Actually, Andy Woods holds a form of that. He believes it's two phases. So he believes, Andy does, that it's a process. So Ezekiel 38 is the earlier part of the tribulation, and Ezekiel 39 is the end of the tribulation. Because he says, like when you go to chapter 37 of Ezekiel, the restoration of Israel is a process. The bones come together, and then you have there's a regathering to the land, and there's physically, then there's a regathering to the Lord spiritually. So we're still in that process. So he would argue that a lot of eschatological events are a process like that, and so this will also be a process. So I was interested in Randy's book. It's is Andy still here? Is he around here? Is it Middle East Meltdown? Middle East Meltdown. So I was interested when I read Andy's books. I knew about Dr. Honer holding that. I had a class in my PhD program with Dr. Alexander, talked with him about that. So anyway, I don't know where those slides went, but anyway, that I had up there.
They got raptured.
They got raptured, yeah. So anyway, I wanted to mention that as well. I'm sorry that I didn't mention that earlier when I was going through those main views. So that's another view that was older, kind of like Gabeline's view. Honer and Alexander held that, but that people still hold today. But I'm sorry, go ahead, I interrupted you. No. I reminded myself to say something I'd forgotten.
No, very good. Thank you so much.
Yeah, sure.
Go ahead over there.
Okay, so using Dr. Price's Evangelical Study Bible, in verse 11, 38:11, it says, I will go up against the land of unwalled villages. Mm-hmm. And then it talks about peaceful people who dwell safely. And then it says again, dwelling without walls and having neither bars nor gates. Mm-hmm. That would seem to be something different than just dwelling safely. Certainly now, there are plenty of walls.
Right.
Is that something different? Is it a
well, some
word?
would make a distinction. They would say, well, there aren't walls around villages. You know what I mean? The cities aren't encompassed. I mean, the old city of Jerusalem has walls, but they're saying the cities don't have walls around them. Doesn't mean there can't be a wall in the country, like one wall, a big barrier wall or something like that. Again, just it depends on how much you want to see what's going on in Israel today is at rest and secure, and how you can kind of nuance this idea of walls or no walls. But that's how I've heard a lot of people describe that. Is it says they're unwalled villages, without. Then it does just say without walls, which might be kind of more categorical. But that's how I've heard some people kind of get around that.
Okay.
A little
Thanks.
bit. Yeah, a good question, though, yes. Yeah, if you go to Israel today, there's certainly some walls over there. And,
Go ahead.
A plug for Andy Woods. There's a video series of that meltdown on YouTube, and it's really good. So you
Good,
should
yes.
check it out. A couple things. All the Jews must go home, according to Ezekiel 39. He will not leave one behind. And we know that about half of them are in the United States today.
No.
The Jews in the
No,
world.
it's not that much anymore.
And I wondered if you've given some thought to that. And then also, more particularly, have you studied, and I'm sure you have, Ezekiel 39, the idea of where Pharaoh Apries is called out to go to war, then he comes back home, civil war, he leaves, Babylon helps him come back, and he's drawn back down by, his jaw, a hook in his jaw, like Ezekiel 38. Have you given some thought to that? Because the idea now is Russia's out of the picture, and we need to, if we're holding to Russia, he's got to be drawn back to that.
yeah, there's all kinds of things could draw them back. I mean, just their relationship to Turkey and Iran and all of that could draw them in, I think. One of my statements I like to use a lot in Bible prophecy, this just, it helps me. We see all these things happening, like even in Syria right now, and I always like to say there's going to be a lot of twists and turns. We don't know all the twists and turns that are going to take place. We kind of know what's going to happen eventually, how it's going to get there, and I think it's okay to speculate about how it's going to happen, as long as we let people know that our speculation isn't in the Bible. The events of the end times can't happen in a vacuum, so there has to be a setup. And we see things happening. We can speculate. Hey, it could happen like this. It could happen like that. But as long as we let people know, hey, I'm just trying to look into how this is going to happen. But we want to be clear. This is what the Bible actually says is going to take place. But so hooks in the jaws. I mean, again, we can speculate on what that could be. But at some point in time, God's going to draw them in. He's going to pull them in there. Now, I don't think that means they're going to not want to come. God's going to drag them in there against their will. They're going to want to do it, but it's going to be God. God's going to be the ultimate one who's providentially behind what's happening.
Okay.
Yes.
He actually asked my question because I was going to talk about the turning around since Russia is now withdrawing.
Yes.
But
yeah.
you just answered it, so thank you.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. Yeah, there's all kinds of things that are happening all the time to look at in this. I mean, it's, we talk about how, Syria fell in lightning speed. Well, I mean, these events are happening today at lightning speed, really, like never before. Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
This was an excellent overview. I guess, and my question has been kind of hinted at by some of the previous questioners, but I'll go more specifically. In chapter 39, in the same context as the burning of the weapons for 7 years, verse 7, my holy name I will make known in the midst of my people Israel. I will not let my holy name be profaned anymore, and the nations will know that I am Yahweh. I'm reading from the LSB, the Holy One in Israel. To me, that language seems like it's coming right out of Ezekiel 36, the hallowing of God's name, sanctifying of God's name. And I'm having trouble putting that at any point before the abomination of desolation in Daniel. How could it be that his name will not be profaned anymore if the greatest act of profaning is still to come? It seems to me that this verse alone almost requires us to place this after the midpoint of the 70th week. So I'm curious with your thoughts on that. What is there any distinction? Is there a way we can separate the never again profaning from the abomination that's still to come?
Yes. Well, a couple of thoughts there. Some people that hold the Gabeline view early in the millennium will use this verse. Hey, God's not going to let his name be profaned anymore. So that would even fit really well there. The way I've taken this, and I've read others who take it this way as well, is that what it means is at this point, when this event happens, this is like a watershed event that takes place. The Jewish people are going to see God's deliverance. I think it's going to be used among them for many of them to come to know Christ. But I think you could translate it, and I hate to add things in there, but the way I would understand it is he's not going to allow his name to be profaned anymore with impunity. In other words, you're not going to be able to just profane my name anymore, just like you haven't. From now on, there's a price to pay. In other words, you can't just go out and profane my name now. We see it all the time now. People profane the name of God and blaspheme his name all the time. I think what he's saying is, once this starts to happen, You're not going to do it anymore and get away with it.
Okay.
So that's the way I would understand it.
Okay. And then
I don't think it's, at that point it'll never be profaned again, because even if you took the abomination of desolation, I mean, in the second half, God's name's still going to be profaned.
right.
But
But if it's the end of the tribulation,
But they're not going to do it without a dramatic, immediate consequence. So
okay.
that's the way I understand that.
okay. And then my second question, and it's somewhat minor, but the burning of the weapons for 7 years, given all the strife and warfare going on throughout the tribulation, it seems like it'd be a strange time to be dispensing with
Yep.
weapons. I mean, that seems to me to call back to the destruction of weapons described in a lot of the Messianic texts in Isaiah and so forth. Why are they getting rid of weapons if they're still at war, especially in the second half of the 70s?
Well, that's a problem for all the views. That's why, again, a lot of the people that put it before the tribulation like to put it 3.5 years at least before, because that way you've got the burning's over by the midpoint.
I see.
So that's why. And again, there's no way that they can prove that it's 3.5 years before, but it makes sense. So, that's why a lot of people that, they'll say, the rapture is going to happen at some point in time. There's going to be this gap of time, and it will be longer than 3.5 years, because part of that will be this Gog-Magog invasion. It'll be 3.5 years before the tribulation starts, and then you go into the first 3.5. So
Yeah, some people believe there'll be a degrading of weapons and they'll return to more primitive weapons.
Right. Yeah, no, that's interesting. I've got a quote often used from Albert Einstein. He says, I don't know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. And, you do see these ancient weapons that are here. My view is that the weapons that are mentioned is just the modern counterparts. It's like we don't look for Rosh, Meshach, Tubal, Togarmah. We look for the modern counterpart of that. Same thing with the weapons. These are the weapons he mentioned in his day, but we look for the modern counterpart of that. But again, it could be, Dr. Walvoord took it literally. It's going to be, there's such degrading during that time that people are going to go back to horses and fighting that way, and the world population may be decreased. We don't know what's going to happen. But,
Okay.
yeah.
Go ahead. You.
Thank you for being here, and congratulations on your new grandbaby.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank
I
you.
sat under
appreciate
your
that.
teaching at the Cove.
Oh, good. Yeah,
So
thank
that
you.
being said,
Yeah, we'll be back there next year, Lord willing, yeah.
Daniel.
They survived all the stuff out there in Asheville.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, that was tough on them. But that being said, Daniel 12, 11 and 12 seems to indicate that there will be 45 days added to the end of the 7-year tribulation period.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think that might have anything to do with the Gog and Magog war being at the beginning, and that would still allow 7 years for burning of the weapons as a literal interpretation of it, and the removal of the Muslims so the temple can be built?
Well, I put that passage there, that the time period that's mentioned after there in the text there in Daniel is after, it's at the end of the tribulation, I take it.
Yes, it's added to the end.
It's a time between, Christ's return and kind of the setting up of the millennium.
Yes,
is there.
that if, I guess here's what I'm trying to say, I guess. Is,
Yeah.
the Antichrist signs a peace treaty, Gog and Magog attacks, God destroys them at the beginning, then they still have 7 years to burn the weapons, and they do away with the Muslim opposition to the temple, and that extra 45 days covers that.
Well, it would help a little bit, but if the Gog-Magog invasion is a couple of years into the tribulation, you're going to have to go, a couple of years into the millennium to do that. That 45 days wouldn't be enough time to do that. For that to take place, for all of that to happen.
I don't know. I didn't know how long it was going to take God to destroy them, but I figured he could do it within 45 days, and it'd still take 7 days to burn the weapons.
Yeah.
7 years
Oh,
to
okay.
destroy all the weapons.
I'm not sure I'm understanding exactly what you're saying. But
Okay, I'll get with you.
I'll talk with you afterwards.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. I'm a bit confused.
Okay, go.
Yeah, this isn't so much a question, but just for your encouragement, Dr. Hitchcock. I'm not sure what happened with your presentation up there, but your PowerPoint from the website does include that information that
okay.
you skipped over. So it's there for
Good.
you.
Oh,
so.
okay, good. All right, good. Yeah, it got me confused. I was looking, I go right to this next down. I even left out that other view too. So about 4 or 5 slides and they were gone. So anyway,
Okay.
I'm the worst person in the world with technology. So I do have more problems than most people do. But
Okay, Brad, with the last question.
All right, last question of the conference. Here it
All
is,
right,
man. It better be
great
good.
presentation. Thanks for the insights.
Yeah,
It's been
sure,
a
thank
great
you.
conference overall. I think I can probably represent everybody by saying that. Just a real quick closing thought about the burning or destruction of the weapons. Having done a fair amount of that, planning that in Iraq, it may very well be that at that point things have reverted back to old-fashioned wooden things, but it could also be just the modern time it takes to destroy weapons. In Iraq, it took a long time to plan that. In some cases, you're just burning munitions to try and get rid of them, and it will take a long time.
Yeah.
Not just necessarily the actual delivery vehicle, but the actual projectiles itself. It could take that long to plan it and execute that and do it safely over time. There's no reason to not take these things literally in terms of time or content, but those are maybe some modern considerations on that when it comes to military means and capabilities.
Good. All right.
Thank
I'll let
you.
Tommy
Thank
close it
you.
out. God bless you guys. Thank you. Pray everybody has a safe trip back home.